There's a story told of two old friends who bump into one another on the street one day. One of them looked very forlorn, almost on the verge of tears. So his friend asked him, "What has the world done to you, my old friend?" And the sad fellow said to him, "Let me tell you. 3 weeks ago, an uncle died and left me $40,000. Well, his friend looked at him and said, "Well, that's a lot of money." "But," he went on, he said, 2 weeks ago, a cousin of mine I never even knew died and left me $85,000 free and clear." And his friend looked at him and said, "Well, you seem like you're a very blessed man." But he interrupted him and said, "Last week, my great aunt passed away. I inherited close to $250,000. Now his friend was very confused. And he said to him, "Well, why do you look so forlorn and so glum?" And his friend looked at him and said, "This week, nothing." The psalm, which Nora sang so beautifully, tells us that the Lord gave them bread from heaven. And yet we hear in Exodus, after being freed from slavery and given manna when they were hungry, what do? They grumble. It wasn't good enough. You see, the Lord gave them just enough food for the day, plenty, and He wouldn't allow them to hoard it or store it, but they wanted more. They weren't satisfied. Doesn't that remind us of ourselves at different times in our lives? That so often we're never satisfied, that nothing ever really fills us up. The fellow in the story, 3 weeks in a row, has left all kinds of money, and then when it stops, he grumbles and complains, he gets depressed and glum, can't appreciate his blessings, he wants more. This weekend, John's Gospel, Jesus challenges us, challenges the people of his day. Do not work for food that perishes. Everything perishes except the bread of life that Jesus talks about, the relationship we have with our God. It all perishes but we put so much of our energy into so many things that ultimately do fail us. And Paul, in that second reading, then challenges us. Paul says to each one of us today, as he said 2,000 years ago, put away your old selves, put on a new self, and be renewed. I think if we look around at our world today, our government, our church, so many institutions, I think we all realize that we live in a time and an age where we have a culture of greed, a culture of never having enough, a culture that constantly grumbles and complains and is never satisfied. We so easily fall for and get caught up in needing to be the best and having it all and always finishing on top, no matter what the cost is to others or even the cost to ourselves. And with this kind of a philosophy, I believe we pay a great price. And the scriptures this weekend challenge all of us to renewal and to change and to conversion. There's a wonderful article in this year's Sports Illustrated that explored the paths of 4 young pitchers in the Minnesota Twins minor league system. The aspiring stars started in the early 1990s during the height of pro baseball's steroid era. Obviously, steroids offered a shortcut for young players who wanted to gain that illegal edge on other players. Well, the article features Dan Nolte, a former pitcher for the Twins and then the Yankees. He decided to take steroids. And when a supplier first injected him with steroids, he admits he was immediately hooked. But today, Nolte acknowledges he was a cheater. He wrote, "You didn't need a written rule. I was violating clear principles that were laid down within the rules. I have no idea how many guys were using drugs, but I would assume anybody that was had some sort of conviction that this was against the rules. To say it wasn't cheating, it's just a fallacy. It was a total disadvantage, though, to play clean." So why did he cheat? Well, he admits that he got caught up in the win-at-all-costs culture in baseball, and he fell for the love of money and superstardom. Interestingly enough, he also claims that no one ever challenged him to avoid steroids. He said, "They don't care if you have character. They don't care if you ruin your life. They care about performance. Nobody ever challenged my steroid use because I was performing. I was getting bigger, and I always had been thin, and now they were telling me that I look great, and I'm playing for the New York Yankees." Similarly, Jeff Horn, a minor league teammate of Nolte's, also started using steroids after several mediocre years in the minors. Obviously, he immediately gained muscle, he improved his hitting, but he got caught after a drug test in 2001. He was not lured by money, but he tells us he was lured by the need to succeed and to prove himself to others. He said, "If I had to do it again, those would not be the decisions I would make. It's something you want so bad, and you spent so many years in the minor leagues, and you're watching all these guys leapfrog ahead of you. I just wanted to get there to prove to myself and the people who didn't have much faith in me that I could do it. It was not a decision to get as big as I could and make millions. I was looking for some kind of personal validation." So is that what it's all about? Personal validation? We just can't get enough of it, and we're never satisfied with that which we get? A guy who 3 weeks in a row inherits all kinds of money, and then when it stops, he grumbles? Or the talents that we have, are they never enough so that we have to use steroids to destroy our health in order to be bigger and better, getting more validation, more success at any cost? I think there's a really important question that pops out in my mind as I reflect upon those scriptures and the culture of our day. And it's a question I think each one of us has to ask as we go through our lives at this present time and whatever we're struggling with. And the question is, when is enough enough? When do we accept ourselves for who we are, accepting our talents as well as our limitations? For some people, whatever is achieved is never enough, and they spend their whole lives searching for more and more and grumbling and complaining when any limitations get in the way. The Israelites were freed from slavery, and when they were hungry, they were given enough for that day. But they wanted more, they wanted to store it up, and they grumbled and complained. Well, the scriptures this weekend challenge each one of us to ask ourselves that question. When is enough enough? Is it time for me to put away my old self and put on a new self? Is it time for me to realize that my personal validation is something that I get from deep inside me and not from outside sources, certainly not from steroids? I think if we look around our world, our government, our church, all of our institutions, we all have to realize and believe that it's time for a renewal of values in our world. It's time to be grateful for what we have. And it's also a time to accept our limitations. And each one of us ask ourselves, when is enough enough.